What happens when a heartbroken woman has a one-night stand with a mysterious stranger, only to discover months later she's pregnant with a royal heir? Meet Elena, a woman betrayed, abandoned, and on the edge. Until fate brings Luca back into her life in the most shocking way, right as she's giving birth. Secrets unravel, love is tested, and a crown is the last thing she expects. But this isn't a fairy tale. It's about second chances, real love, and the power of choosing each other. Where are you watching from? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more unforgettable stories. Elena Marlowe had never looked more radiant. Her chestnut hair tumbled in soft waves down her back, catching the golden hues of the late afternoon sun as she adjusted the neckline of her deep emerald dress. It was her and Logan's third anniversary, a milestone she tried so hard to believe would mean something this time. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floors of her apartment as she paced, nervously checking her phone every few seconds. No message, no call, just a single text from hours earlier. Be ready at 7. Wear something nice. She had hoped, prayed even, that this would be the night Logan would finally prove her wrong, that he would show her their relationship wasn't just built on convenience and charm, but something deeper, something real. He had a way of making her feel like the only woman in the room when he wanted to. But lately, those moments had become rare. More often than not, she found herself wondering if she loved him, or if she just loved the idea of not starting over. At exactly 7:04 p.m., the low purr of his silver Mustang announced his arrival. He didn't come to the door. He never did. Elena sighed, grabbed her coat, and descended the steps to the curb, where Logan waited behind the wheel, sunglasses still on even though the sun was setting. "You look amazing," he said, barely glancing at her as she slid into the passenger seat. His voice had that smooth, casual tone she used to find sexy. Now it felt rehearsed. "Thanks," she murmured, her eyes flicking toward him with a forced smile. The city rushed past them in streaks of red and gold as Logan turned the car toward the heart of downtown. Elena tried to start small talk. How was work? Did he remember the place they first had dinner? But he brushed off her questions with vague answers. She kept reminding herself, maybe he has something planned, something special. But when they pulled into the valet line of the Ambrosia Hotel, her heart sank. "Wait, I thought we were going to La Serre," she asked, trying to keep her tone even. "You said you had a reservation." Logan shrugged as he handed the keys to the valet. "Changed my mind." His words were laced with implication. Elena's stomach turned. Inside, the hotel was opulent, all marble and gold accents, but none of it impressed her. Logan didn't check in. He already had a key. They rode the elevator in silence to the 10th floor, the atmosphere between them thick with unspoken tension. When the doors opened, she followed him into a suite. It was sleek, sterile, and lifeless. No candles, no music, no flowers, just a bed, crisply made and cold. "Where's the surprise?" she asked quietly. "You're looking at it," Logan said, loosening his tie with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Her skin prickled. "Logan, what are we doing here?" He stepped closer. "Come on, Lena. It's been 3 years. I've told you, I'm not ready for that. And I've waited long enough," he snapped, his expression hardening. "You think I've stuck around just for cuddles and hand-holding?" The words hit like a slap. Elena stepped back, but he reached for her wrist. "Don't," she said firmly, yanking her arm away. He grabbed it again, rougher this time. "Logan, stop." But he didn't. He pushed her toward the bed, his grip tightening. Her pulse pounded in her ears as panic flared in her chest. She shoved him, slapped him hard across the face. He staggered back, stunned. "You bastard," she spat, breath shaking. "Don't you ever touch me again." Elena stormed out, heels echoing against the marble floor of the hotel lobby. The cold air hit her like ice as she stepped onto the street, barely noticing the honk of a cab speeding past. Her body trembled, not just from fear, but from betrayal. Tears blurred her vision as she walked aimlessly, not caring where her feet led her. That's when she saw it. A small bar on the corner of 9th and Main, its faded neon sign blinking lazily like it was on its last breath. She hesitated, then pushed the door open, letting the quiet hum of jazz music and the warmth of aged whiskey pull her in. All she wanted was to forget. For one night. She didn't know it yet, but that bar would change her life forever. The bar was nearly empty, bathed in the soft amber glow of hanging Edison bulbs and the lingering scent of pine wood and aged bourbon. Elena made her way to the far end of the counter, the stool creaking slightly beneath her as she sat down. Her fingers trembled as she flagged the bartender. "Tequila," she said, her voice raw. "Strongest you've got." The first shot burned all the way down, setting fire to the ache in her chest. The second made her lips tingle. By the third, the blur behind her eyes had settled into something quieter, numb but better than the storm that had been raging moments ago. "You keep going like that, you'll end up passed out under the bar," came a voice beside her, low, deep, unbothered. She turned slowly, her eyes trying to focus. The man next to her looked like he'd stepped off the cover of a magazine. Tousled dark hair, a strong jaw, and a rolled-up white button-down that hugged his frame in all the right ways. But what caught her attention wasn't his appearance. It was his eyes. Calm, stormy, and unreadable. The kind of eyes that held their own secrets. "Do I look like I need a babysitter?" Elena muttered, her words slightly slurred. "No," he said, a slight smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. "But you do look like someone trying to forget something she shouldn't have had to remember in the first place." She blinked at him, surprised by the accuracy of that statement. "You... a therapist or something?" "Nope," he replied, turning toward his own drink. "Just a guy who's had a bad night or two himself." She scoffed and turned back to her glass. "Well, you can mind your own business." "I could," he agreed. "But then I'd have to pretend I didn't notice a beautiful woman spiraling solo in a place like this." Elena let out a dry laugh. "Beautiful? Huh? You lay that line on all the drunks, or just the messy ones?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied her quietly, and for a second she thought he might walk away. But then, he said, just the ones who don't realize they deserve better. Something about the way he said it. Not flirty, not pushy, just honest. Hit her in a place she wasn't expecting. She turned to look at him again, more clearly this time. He hesitated, as if the question held weight. Julian, Elena. They didn't shake hands. It didn't feel necessary. The bartender poured another round without being asked. "So," Elena Julian said, voice quieter now, "you planning to make bad decisions all night, or just until you forget whatever he did to you?" She flinched, then looked down at her glass.
"How do you know it was a guy?"
He lifted his glass slightly. "Because I've been that guy. And I've watched women walk away from tables looking just like you." A long silence followed. Then Elena stood, wobbled, and tried to walk toward the jukebox in the corner. But her knees buckled. Before she hit the ground, Julian caught her, his arms strong and steady around her waist. Easy, he said, guiding her back to the stool. I'm fine, she said, breathless. You're not, he replied, but that's okay. She looked up at him, close enough now to smell the faint spice of his cologne. I don't have anywhere to go, she admitted, the words slipping out before she could catch them. You can crash at my place, he offered, surprising even himself. Nothing weird, I promise. Just safe. Elena searched his eyes for any sign of deception, but all she found was sincerity and something like concern. Maybe it was the tequila, maybe it was the emptiness inside her, but she nodded. The ride in the elevator was quiet. She leaned into him without thinking, her body exhausted, her mind barely hanging on. His penthouse was sleek, minimal, almost too clean, but warm in a way she didn't expect. He helped her into bed, pulled the blankets over her gently. You want water? Something to eat? She turned toward him, eyelids heavy. I want you, she whispered. Julian froze. You're kind, she murmured, and handsome. I think. He gave a soft chuckle. I've been called worse. Then she reached for him, and when she kissed him, tentative, uncertain, full of confusion. It wasn't about romance. It was about something real. Something human. A connection forged from two people who had been cracked by the world, just trying to find a moment where it didn't hurt so much. And in that moment, everything shifted. The bathroom floor was cold against Elena's bare legs as she sank to her knees, the white plastic stick trembling in her hand. She stared at it, willing the second line to disappear, but it remained bold, pink, undeniable, positive. Her breath hitched as she let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. No, she whispered, shaking her head like that might undo the last 5 minutes. No, this can't be happening. But it was. And the evidence was sitting in her palm, as real and unforgiving as the choices she couldn't take back. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to breathe, trying to think. The tequila. The bar. Julian. The bar. The blur of his voice. His hands. The soft warmth of his bed. No number. No last name. No goodbye. Just a folded blanket and the scent of his cologne on her skin when she woke up alone. She hadn't even thought it was possible. It was just one night. One stupid, impulsive night. One stupid, impulsive night. A knock came on the door, soft and cautious. Well, you okay in there? It was Maya, her best friend, roommate, and, thank God, lifeline. Elena couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight. Her heart too loud. She managed to stand, unlock the door, and hold out the test in her shaking hand. Maya's eyes widened. Is that... Elena nodded, unable to say it out loud. Oh my God, Maya whispered. Then, without hesitation, she wrapped Elena in a hug so tight it nearly knocked the air out of her. We're going to figure this out, okay? I've got you. Elena clung to her like a drowning woman to a life raft, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. The next few days passed in a fog. Maya cleared her calendar, cooked all of Elena's favorite comfort foods, and gently urged her to tell her parents. Elena wasn't ready, but she knew she couldn't hide it forever. When she finally worked up the nerve, it was a Sunday afternoon. She wore a loose sweater to hide her still flat stomach and practiced the words over and over in her head. I'm pregnant. I don't know who the father is. I need your support. That's all she wanted. To be seen, to be loved, through the mess. But what she got was silence. And then the storm. You what? Her father, Richard, barked, standing from his recliner with a glare so sharp it cut through her. I didn't mean for this to happen, Elena said, her voice barely audible. It was one night. I wasn't thinking clearly. Her mother, Deborah, stood motionless by the kitchen island, her arms folded tight, lips pressed in a line. You don't even know who the father is, Richard's voice rose. Do you have any idea what kind of shame this brings to this family? Elena swallowed hard, blinking back the tears that burned behind her eyes. I'm still your daughter. Not anymore, he snapped. Not until you fix this mess. Deborah didn't say a word. She just turned away. Elena stood there, frozen in the quiet that followed. Her heart had been prepared for anger, but not exile, not the complete erasure of everything she was to them. Without another word, she walked out. That night, she moved into Maya's spare bedroom permanently. There were no questions asked, just clean sheets, soft lighting, and an extra toothbrush waiting on the sink. You'll stay with me, Maya said firmly. Forget them. You and this baby. That's all that matters now. Elena tried to be strong. She worked remotely, picking up freelance design jobs from her laptop. Her once glamorous job as a flight attendant was a closed chapter now. The nausea came in unpredictable waves, and so did the loneliness. But every time she felt a flutter inside her belly, she placed a hand over it and whispered, I've got you, little one. I promise. Still, a part of her couldn't let go. She returned to the bar a few weeks later, hoping for some trace of him, Julian. But the building was boarded up, a chalkboard sign reading permanently closed. No forwarding number, no clue, like he'd vanished. Sometimes, in the quiet of early morning, she questioned if he'd been real at all, if that night had been a dream carved out of desperation. But her growing belly was proof, and as terrifying as it all was, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. The days blurred together like brushstrokes on a canvas Elena hadn't meant to paint. Mornings began with nausea and the distant hum of Maya's coffee machine, and ended with aching feet, sore muscles, and the quiet flutter of a growing life inside her. The city pulsed outside the apartment windows, always moving, always rushing, but Elena felt like she was standing still in the eye of her own personal storm. She worked when she could, taking freelance design gigs from clients who didn't care what time zone she was in or whether she answered emails in pajama pants. Her old life, jet-setting between cities, sipping champagne in first class, flirting with adventure, felt like something that had belonged to someone else. Someone lighter, someone whole. The first trimester was brutal. Some mornings, she couldn't even lift her head without feeling like the room was tilting. Maya, true to form, became a force of nature. She stocked the fridge with ginger ale and saltines, downloaded pregnancy tracker apps, and spent hours researching safe herbal teas. She even offered to punch Richard Marlowe in the face. When Elena tearfully admitted her father had disowned her. I mean it, Maya said one night, pacing the kitchen with dramatic flair. I will knock on his door, call him a dinosaur in loafers, and then leave a baby book titled, How Not to Suck as a Grandparent on Their Porch. Elena managed to laugh, which felt like a small victory. Most nights, the ache in her chest kept her awake longer than the baby did. At least until she started dreaming about him. Julian. The name hung in her mind like a note of music she couldn't place. She hadn't stopped thinking about him. Not because she believed he'd come back, she wasn't naive, but because he was the last thread tying her to the beginning of all this. Her memories of that night were fragmented and slippery, but the feeling remained, the warmth of his voice, the way his arms had steadied her without hesitation, and the look in his eyes, like he saw her even when she didn't want to be seen. She tried everything. A reverse phone lookup using the number on the Uber receipt. Dead end. She visited the bar again, but it remained dark and lifeless. a for sale sign slapped in the window, like a cruel punctuation mark. She asked around, even posted in a few local forums, looking for the man who helped me home from One Avenue bar the night of March 17th. Nothing. It was like trying to chase a ghost. Maya caught her staring at the ceiling one night, arms folded behind her head, belly starting to round beneath her sweatshirt. "You're doing it again," Maya said softly from the doorway. "Doing what?" "Hoping. Hoping." Elena didn't answer right away. I wonder if he'd even want to know. If I told him, and he looked at me like I was crazy. Like I made it up. Maya crossed the room and sat beside her on the bed. Then he's not the kind of man worth knowing. But if he is, if he's even half the guy you remember, he deserves the truth, and you deserve peace. Elena nodded, though peace still felt far away. She had stopped hoping for magic or rescue or fairy tale endings. But some nights, when the city grew quiet and she whispered to her baby, she found a strange comfort in the unknown. "I don't know who your father is," she said once, her voice a gentle hush in the dark. "But I know what kind of mom I want to be. Brave, kind, someone who never lets you feel like you're not enough." And slowly, something shifted inside her. Not the baby. Though that happened too. But her resolve, her spine straightened. Her heart steadied. She didn't need a prince or an apology. She just needed to be strong enough to carry this new life into the world. By the time her second trimester rolled around, the morning sickness eased, and she started to feel almost human again. She picked up more work, bought a second-hand crib, and even let Maya drag her to a prenatal yoga class, though she nearly fell asleep during the final breathing exercise. Her body was changing. Her life was changing. And though she still didn't have all the answers, she had one thing she hadn't felt in a long, long time. Purpose. Purpose. It was the first crisp morning of October, the kind where the air held that delicate edge of change, cool, golden, and smelling faintly of fallen leaves. Elena stood on the porch of Maya's townhouse, one hand braced on her aching lower back, the other clutching a small canvas tote stuffed with prenatal vitamins, her appointment card, and a folded ultrasound photo she never went anywhere without. She was 38 weeks pregnant, and every step now felt like an uphill hike with a watermelon strapped to her stomach. She exhaled slowly, wincing as she adjusted her weight on her swollen feet. Maya had offered to take her to the checkup like always, but her boss had called her into an emergency court filing. Elena had waved her off with a smile, saying she'd be fine. "The clinic's 10 minutes away. I can manage." Now, as she slowly descended the porch steps, doubt crept in. Her ankles had all but disappeared, and her body moved like it had forgotten how to bend. She eased herself into the back seat of the waiting cab, sighing in relief as she leaned back. Halfway through the ride, a sharp cramp tore across her abdomen, fast and low. Her fingers dug into the edge of the seat. She inhaled sharply through her nose, exhaled through her mouth, just like the instructor had said in class. Just like the instructor had said in class. Probably just Braxton Hicks, she told herself. False labor. Nothing serious. Then came the second one. Stronger. Deeper. Followed by an unmistakable gush of warmth that spread across her leggings and pooled beneath her thighs. Elena's eyes flew open. "Oh no," she whispered. The cab driver glanced at her through the mirror. "Ma'am, everything all right?" I think my water just broke." The cab swerved slightly as the driver panicked.
"Hospital, yes. Closest one."
"Yes," Elena gasped, gripping the handle aside her as another wave of pain crashed through her. "Please, hurry." The driver made a sharp U-turn, cutting across lanes, horns blaring behind them. Elena clutched her stomach, her mind racing. She fumbled through her phone with shaking fingers, trying to call Maya. No answer. She tried again, voicemail. No partner to call. No family. Just her. Just this baby. Just now. The cab jerked to a stop at a red light in the middle of traffic. She leaned forward, panting, her vision swimming. Her back arched involuntarily as another contraction pulled through her like a current. Then, the back door flung open. "Are you okay?" a voice called out. Elena blinked up, dazed, squinting against the morning light. A man in a charcoal suit stood beside the cab, his expression one of alarm. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and piercing eyes that looked oddly familiar. "I'm in labor," she choked out. "Please, help me." He didn't hesitate. "My car's across the street. Come on." Before she could protest, he had carefully scooped her into his arms and was moving through the crosswalk. Traffic be damned. Drivers honked furiously as he weaved between bumpers, holding her like she weighed nothing. "I can't," she gasped, wincing. "You can," he said, voice calm but urgent. "Just hold on." He guided her into the back seat of a sleek black Mercedes parked at the curb. The second she was in, he shut the door and slid into the front, tapping the screen on his dash. "Calling the hospital now," he muttered. Elena gritted her teeth through another contraction, sweat forming at her temples. Her hand clutched the headrest in front of her. "Please don't leave me," she whispered between breaths. He froze, eyes flicking to the mirror. And then, her voice, her eyes, that look. Luca Cross felt the blood drain from his face. It was her. The woman from the bar, from that night. From the dream that had haunted him for months. She was in his back seat, in labor, and clearly very pregnant. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles went white. He swallowed hard, heart pounding in his chest. She groaned, her face contorted with pain. "Feels like forever," she muttered. "Just a few more minutes," he said, voice strangely hoarse. Luca didn't know what the hell this meant, but somehow, impossibly, fate had brought her back into his life, at the exact moment she needed him most. And if the timing in his head was right, and the look on her face meant anything, the baby might be his. The hospital's emergency bay erupted into motion the second the Mercedes screeched to a halt. Nurses rushed out with a wheelchair, barking orders, one of them holding the automatic doors open as Luca jumped from the driver's seat and ran around to the back. Elena was pale, drenched in sweat, and clutching her belly with both arms. She looked at him with wide, terrified eyes. "Don't leave me," she whispered, her voice trembling. He froze for a second. Just long enough for the words to hit him like a brick. And then nodded, his throat tightening. "I won't." They wheeled her inside, a flurry of blue scrubs and clipped voices. Luca trailed behind, stunned, until a nurse held up a hand at the double doors of the delivery wing. "This is as far as you go, sir." "I'm not," he started, unsure how to explain what he was. Not her husband, not even someone she really knew. But before he could finish, Elena looked over her shoulder. "Please wait," she said, barely audible. And he did. He paced the hallway like a man lost in his own body. His heart thudded painfully in his chest, his brain spinning through every second of the last hour. Her face, her voice, the shape of her eyes when she cried out in pain. It was her. There was no doubt. The same woman who had stumbled into that bar months ago, kissed him like she was trying not to drown, and then disappeared before the sun came up. He'd woken to a cold pillow and the ghost of her perfume. He had searched, God. He had tried, asked around, pulled footage from the building security camera, even paid off the bartender. Nothing. She had become a memory, a haunting. Until now. 40 minutes passed, or maybe an hour. Time meant nothing, as he sat stiffly in the molded plastic chair, fingers clenched, bouncing against his knee. What if she was hurt? What if the baby wasn't okay? What if...
Sir, a soft voice broke through his thoughts.
Luca stood instantly. A nurse in pastel scrubs smiled gently at him, her mask dangling beneath her chin. "Congratulations," she said. "Your wife just gave birth to a healthy baby girl." He blinked. "I'm not her," but she was already motioning for him to follow. Too stunned to protest, he trailed her through a maze of hallways, past rows of glowing bassinets and sleepy new fathers. At the nursery window, another nurse was waiting, holding a tiny pink bundle swaddled so tightly she looked like a doll. "Would you like to hold your daughter?" she asked, already extending the baby toward him. Lucas stared at the child, heart suddenly in his throat. "I don't know if I should." But it didn't matter. The baby was already in his arms, impossibly small and warm and real. Her face was round, lips puckered, fingers curling instinctively around his pinky. His breath caught. She was beautiful. He couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Something inside him cracked wide open. Something primal, something sacred. It was unlike anything he had ever felt in his life. Not in business, not in pleasure, not even in love. This was something else. A tidal wave of protectiveness and awe and disbelief, all wrapped around 6 pounds of new life. He didn't want to let go. 2 days later, Elena was discharged. Maya arrived in a whirlwind of bags and bottled water, helping her gather her things while Lucas stood nearby, unsure of where he belonged. He had barely said a word to Elena since the birth, afraid to push too hard, afraid to push too hard, afraid to say the wrong thing. But when the nurse handed him the hospital bill, nearly $50,000, Elena's face went white. She stammered, reaching for her bag, panic flaring in her eyes. "I've got it," Luca said softly. She looked up at him, stunned. "What?" "I've got it. Don't worry." Maya pulled him aside later, arms crossed. "Are you serious? You don't even know if you're the father." "I know enough," Luca replied. Back at his penthouse that night, he sat in the dark, the receipt still folded in his wallet. He hadn't paid out of guilt, not to impress her. He'd done it because the moment he looked into that baby's eyes, he knew it in his soul. She was his. And he wasn't going anywhere. The afternoon sun filtered through the blinds of Maya's apartment, casting warm stripes across the floor as Elena sat curled on the couch, baby Eloise swaddled in her arms. The newborn's breathing was soft, rhythmic, grounding. Elena rocked gently, her eyes heavy from sleepless nights, her thoughts even heavier. She hadn't spoken much since they left the hospital. Not to Maya. Not to Maya. Not to Luca. Not even to herself. But she couldn't stop thinking about him. He had been there for everything. Held her hand in the waiting room. Paid her hospital bill without a second thought. Even cradled Eloise like she was the most precious thing in the world. And yet, he was still a stranger. A beautiful, complicated stranger who somehow managed to step back into her life at the very moment she needed someone the most. She hadn't asked why, not yet. But part of her was afraid of the answer. So when Luca called and asked if he could stop by, she said yes before she could talk herself out of it. He arrived 20 minutes later, dressed simply in a black sweater and jeans, a pack of diapers under one arm and a bag of groceries in the other. When Maya opened the door and saw him, her brows arched in amused disbelief. "Look who's playing house," she muttered as she let him in. Elena looked up from the couch, unsure how to feel. He looked so casual, so at ease. So... Hey, he said softly, setting everything down on the kitchen counter. Hey. Hey. They stared at each other for a beat too long. Then, she nodded toward the baby. She just fell asleep. Luca stepped closer, his gaze falling to Eloise with something almost reverent. She's perfect. Yeah, Elena whispered, brushing a thumb across her daughter's soft cheek. She is. They stood in silence for a while, the only sound the quiet hum of the refrigerator and Eloise's soft sighs. Finally, Elena set the baby down in her bassinet and turned to face him. Who are you, really? Luca's expression didn't shift. He'd been waiting for this. I was hoping we'd get to that part, he said gently. Do you remember what I told you that night? That I walked away from something big? Elena nodded slowly. You said you wanted a normal life. I meant it, he said, but I left out a few details. She crossed her arms. Like, Luca exhaled. My full name is Julian Luca Cross. My family. They're not just wealthy. They're aristocracy, old-world European royalty. I'm the only son, which technically makes me heir to the Castellan throne. Elena blinked at him. Once, twice. I'm sorry, did you just say throne? He nodded. I walked away from all of it a few years ago. Wanted to build something of my own, on my own terms. I opened that bar, One Avenue, used the money I'd earned quietly. I didn't want the title, the expectations, the scrutiny. Then you walked in. She stared at him, mouth slightly open.
So what? You're like a prince.
Technically, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Though I'd prefer not to be addressed that way while I'm holding a bottle of formula. Elena let out a short, stunned laugh, more from shock than humor. So let me get this straight. I slept with a prince, got pregnant by a prince, and now I'm, what? Part of some royal drama I didn't sign up for. No, Luca said quickly, stepping closer. You're not part of anything unless you choose to be. I'm not here to drag you into a crown and scepter fantasy. I'm here because of her, because of you, because I want to be in both of your lives, not as a royal, but as a man who hasn't stopped thinking about you since that night. Her chest tightened. She didn't want to believe him. She'd been let down too many times. But the look in his eyes wasn't rehearsed. It was raw, real. What do your parents think about all this? She asked. They know now, he said. They want to meet you, and Eloise. Elena's stomach flipped. They want to meet us. He nodded. I won't lie, it won't be easy. They have their opinions, but my mother's curious. My father's stoic. But they'll come around. She shook her head slowly, eyes wide with disbelief. This wasn't how my life was supposed to go. Maybe not, Luca said quietly, but what if it's better? Elena didn't respond, but as she looked down at her daughter and then back at the man who refused to walk away, something softened inside her. She wasn't ready to say yes. But maybe she wasn't ready to say yes, but maybe she wasn't ready to say no either. It started with a knock at the door. Elena had just put Eloise down for a nap and was half-heartedly folding laundry on the couch when she heard it. 2 short taps, then one longer one, like someone trying to make a rhythm out of nerves. She opened the door to find Luca standing there holding a stroller in one hand, 2 boxes of diapers in the other, and a laundry basket filled with baby clothes tucked beneath his arm. Maya peered around the corner from the kitchen, coffee mug in hand. Well, well, well. Well. Look who's decided to become super dad. Luca grinned, just trying to make a good impression. Elena didn't say anything at first. She was too stunned by the sheer amount of effort he'd put into whatever this was. Not just the items, but the look in his eyes. Focused, warm, determined. She stepped aside to let him in, and he walked past her carefully, like he knew her walls were still half-built and fragile. That night, he cooked dinner. Real food, not takeout. Roasted chicken, potatoes, and garlic green beans. The smell filled the apartment with something Elena hadn't realized she'd been missing. Comfort, stability, family. They sat at the table, Eloise asleep in her carrier beside them, candles flickering in the corners like the place was daring to feel like home. Elena picked at her plate, but her appetite crept back bite by bite. "Tell me about you," Luca said, halfway through the meal, watching her with that same patient intensity he always seemed to carry. "What do you want to know?" "Everything." She rolled her eyes but couldn't stop the smile tugging at her lips. "I've got time," he said, leaning in just slightly. So she told him pieces. About growing up in a house where appearances mattered more than feelings. About the thrill of being a flight attendant, of seeing places she'd only dreamed about as a kid. About how she had always imagined being a mom someday, but not like this. Not alone. Not scared. And he listened. Not just nodded, but listened. With quiet questions and small hums of understanding. Like he was taking it all in and tucking it away somewhere safe. Later that week, he came back with a new swing set for the baby, a bottle warmer, and a storybook with Eloise's name already written on the inside cover in looping gold ink. Every time he appeared, Elena felt her resistance crumbling bit by bit, not because he was trying to impress her, but because he wasn't trying at all. He was just there. And after everything, the presence alone meant more than any grand gesture. Still, she wasn't ready. Not yet. He knew it too. One night, as they sat on the couch watching Eloise stir in her sleep, he glanced at Elena, then down at his hands. "I know you're still figuring things out," he said gently. "But I meant what I said before. I want to be in her life, and yours. If you'll let me." Elena hesitated. Her heart wanted to leap, but her mind pulled back. "You think marrying me will fix this?" Luca blinked. "What?" "You show up with diapers, cook a few dinners, and suddenly you want to play dad." Her tone was sharp, but beneath it, her voice cracked. He didn't flinch. Not out of guilt. Out of responsibility. Out of choice. She let out a dry laugh. "You barely know me, Luca. We spent one night together. Now you want to be my daughter's father. And what? Move in?" "No," he said, standing slowly. "I want to marry you." The silence that followed was deafening. Elena stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language.
"You're insane!"
"Maybe," he admitted, a soft smile tugging at his mouth. "But I haven't stopped thinking about you since that night. And when I saw her, when I saw you, I knew I had to try. I don't want to be a what if. I want to be the guy who stays." She shook her head, overwhelmed, but something in her chest stirred. He wasn't just asking for a chance. He was offering a life. And somewhere deep inside her, the part that still believed in second chances whispered, "Maybe." The garden behind the courthouse was small but beautiful, wisteria climbing up a wrought iron trellis, rose bushes blooming defiantly against the early spring chill. Elena stood beneath a canopy of soft white fabric, her cream-colored dress hugging her body in all the right places, its delicate sleeves brushing against her healing arms. The faint ache in her lower back reminded her that she wasn't far removed from childbirth. But today, none of that mattered. Today, she was marrying Julian Luca Cross. It hadn't been a fairy tale proposal. There'd been no kneeling in candlelight, no grand speech. Just a quiet promise, and then another, and another, until those promises started building something real between them. Something worth fighting for. It was too fast, too sudden, and entirely too uncertain. But when Elena looked at Luca now, standing in a charcoal gray suit that somehow made his already handsome features look sharper, calmer, steadier, she didn't care. Because for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was walking into something blind. She felt like she was walking with someone. Maya stood to her left in a soft navy dress, holding baby Eloise bundled in a crocheted blanket. The judge's voice was calm and clear as he read the vows from a small leather-bound book. No one else was there. No guests. No photographers. Just the breeze, the blossoms, and the sound of new beginnings. "You may kiss the bride," the judge said with a warm smile. Luca turned to her, eyes searching hers for permission. Elena tilted her chin slightly, heart thudding. He kissed her gently, no urgency, no heat, just a soft seal of something that had been building in silence and gestures, and late-night bottles, and folded baby laundry. Something real. Afterward, they didn't go on a honeymoon or throw a party. Instead, they drove straight to her parents' house. She hadn't seen them since the day her father told her she was no longer his daughter. The closer they got to the modest home on the edge of town, the tighter her chest became. Eloise fussed softly in the car seat beside her, and Luca reached over to squeeze her hand. "Let me talk first," he whispered. When they reached the porch, Elena hesitated, her hand frozen halfway to the door. Before she could knock, it opened. Her father stood there, his face unreadable, the lines in his forehead deeper than she remembered. His gaze shifted from her to Luca, then down to the baby carrier. "Mr. Marlowe," Luca said, stepping forward with calm confidence. "My name is Julian Luca Cross. I'm here to ask for your daughter's hand." Dale Marlowe's eyes narrowed.
Bit late for that, don't you think?
Luca nodded. "Maybe. But I take full responsibility for everything. I didn't know she was pregnant. I didn't even know her name that night. But I do now, and I love her. I love her daughter. And I intend to spend the rest of my life proving that to both of them." There was a tense pause. Then, slowly, and to everyone's surprise, Luca dropped to one knee, not to propose, but to make it clear this wasn't about pride. It was about humility. About intention. "I don't care what you think of me," he said, meeting Dale's eyes. "But I want Elena to have her family back. I want our daughter to know she's loved. Not just by us, but by her grandparents, too." Christine Marlowe appeared behind her husband, her face softer than it had been in months. She stepped forward first, touching Elena's cheek like she'd been afraid to before. Dale looked down at Luca, then at Elena. Without a word, he stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, the house smelled like rosemary and warm bread, like it always had. Maya followed with Eloise in her arms, and almost instantly, the baby became the center of gravity in the room. Even Dale, usually stern and distant, sat forward when she yawned and curled a fist against her cheek. At one point, Elena caught him smiling. Just a flicker, but it was real. Later that evening, back at their apartment, Elena sat beside Luca on the couch, Eloise asleep on his chest. "Why did you really want to marry me?" she asked quietly. He turned to her, brushing a piece of hair behind her ear. "I wanted to marry you before I even knew she existed." "You didn't even know my name," she said, though there was no anger in her voice now. "No," he admitted, "but I remembered your eyes. That was enough." And this time, she believed him. Morning light spilled across the kitchen counter as Elena stirred a pot of oatmeal. Her robe tied loosely at the waist, Eloise perched in her high chair, babbling at her own reflection in a silver spoon. The smell of cinnamon filled the air, mingling with the hum of early peace. Luca padded in barefoot, hair tousled, phone pressed to his ear, as he mumbled something she couldn't quite catch. She watched him from the corner of her eye. He'd been tense lately, checking emails with a furrowed brow, stepping out onto the balcony to take calls that ended in long silences. This morning was no different. When he finally hung up, he stood still for a moment, then turned toward her, eyes soft but uncertain. "Everything okay?" she asked, placing a bowl in front of Eloise. He hesitated. "That was my assistant, Greg. He's been covering for me while I've been—" She nodded, carefully neutral. "Right? Your company." Luca chuckled under his breath, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's more than that, actually. There's something I've been meaning to tell you." Elena stilled. The last time he'd said those words, he'd revealed he was a royal heir. "What now?" "I'm not just the heir to Castellan," he said, stepping closer. "I'm the only heir, which means my parents expect me to come back, not just to visit. To stay, eventually, at least." She blinked, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "You're saying they want you to go back and rule?" He nodded slowly. "Eventually, yes." "But they've been patient so far." And now, Elena's stomach dropped. "Meet me," she repeated. "Like, now." "They're flying in next week," he said gently. "Or they were, but I told them we'd come to them instead. It'll be better that way. Less pressure." She stared at him. "So let me get this straight. I married a prince, had his baby, and now I'm being flown to Europe to meet a literal king and queen." "Technically, yes," Lucas said, his smile sheepish. "But I didn't want you to marry a prince. I wanted you to marry me. And they'll love you, eventually. My mom's already obsessed with Eloise just from the photos." Elena leaned back against the counter, her fingers curling around the edge. "Luca, I'm not royal. I didn't grow up in palaces. My parents didn't teach me how to curtsy. I wore drugstore makeup to our wedding. What if they think I'm not enough?" He stepped closer, taking her hand. "You're more than enough. You're real. You're real. You're strong. You raised our daughter on your own when I wasn't even in the picture. You don't need a title to belong." Tears burned behind her eyes, but she blinked them back. "And what about Eloise? Are they going to try to make her some kind of princess?" "Only if we let them," he said. "But they won't get to define who she becomes." "We will." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're sure?" He nodded. "I want you both in my world, not because it's royal, but because it's mine. And I can't imagine it without you." It took days to prepare. Maya insisted on helping her pick out something suitable. "Something that says elegant, but I still know how to hold a baby with one hand and make coffee with the other," she declared. They boarded the private jet late in the evening, Eloise snoozing peacefully in her bassinet, Luca thumbing through briefing notes with surprising calm. Elena sat by the window, watching clouds drift by, wondering if this was all some dream she'd wake up from. But when they landed and the gates of the royal estate opened, reality hit her full force. The palace was something out of a painting. White stone towers gleaming beneath the afternoon sun, rows of gardens blooming in a symmetrical burst of color. Guards in crisp uniforms flanked the front steps, and at the top stood two figures waiting. Queen Isolde descended first, graceful and glowing, her expression warm as she approached. "Elena," she said, her voice melodic. "Welcome, my dear." Without hesitation, she wrapped Elena in a soft, maternal hug. "I've been waiting so long to meet you, and my granddaughter." Elena nearly forgot to breathe. She smiled politely, barely managing a whisper. "Thank you, Your Majesty." "Call me Isolde, please," the Queen said. "We're family now." Behind her, King Alaric remained still, his gaze cool and unreadable as it shifted from Luca to Elena, and finally to the sleeping baby in her arms. "She's small," he muttered. "She's 2 months old," Luca replied dryly. The king's eyes narrowed on Elena. "You're not what I expected." Without thinking, Elena straightened her spine. "Neither was your son." The silence that followed was deafening, until Alaric let out a low chuckle. "Well," he said, "at least you're honest." The palace glowed in the soft evening light, its windows flickering gold against the deepening blue sky. Inside, the grandeur was overwhelming. Towering ceilings, walls adorned with centuries, old portraits, and chandeliers that sparkled like constellations suspended in air. Elena walked slowly through the hallways with Luca by her side, Eloise nestled against her chest in a silky wrap. Every step echoed. Every step echoed. Every glance from a passing staff member made her feel like she was starring in a movie she didn't remember auditioning for. But despite the opulence, there was a rhythm to life here she hadn't expected. The servants weren't stiff or silent. They smiled, cooed over Eloise, and treated her not like an outsider, but like someone who mattered. Queen Isolde, Mira, as she insisted Elena call her, was especially warm. She took every opportunity to sit with Elena, telling stories about Luca as a child, and lavishing Eloise with soft dresses, hand-knit blankets, and lullabies in a language Elena didn't yet understand. King Alaric was harder to read. He still rarely spoke more than a few words at a time, and when he did, they often sounded more like statements than conversations. But the first time, Elena placed Eloise in his arms. Tentatively, holding her breath, some shifted. His gruff exterior melted just slightly as he looked down at the tiny face peeking up at him. He didn't say anything, but when Elena glanced back at him moments later, she saw it. His thumb brushing the baby's hand, his eyes misting in a way he probably hadn't realized she'd noticed. They stayed in the east wing of the palace, in a suite larger than Elena's entire apartment back home. The bed was massive, the bathroom had heated floors, and someone came in every morning with fresh pastries and coffee so smooth it made her question everything she'd ever brewed herself. And yet, even surrounded by all this luxury, Elena found herself drawn to the quietest moments. Luca reading to Eloise beneath the canopy in the garden, or the way Mira would slip a shawl around Elena's shoulders when the evenings turned cool. It was surreal, but slowly, it started to feel less like a vacation and more like life. A strange, sparkly, completely unplanned version of it, but real. One evening, Elena stood out on the balcony overlooking the gardens. The stars above Castellan were brighter than any she'd ever seen, millions of them shimmering over the countryside like they were close enough to touch. She heard Luca before she felt him, his footsteps soft behind her, then his arms circling her waist from behind. "Still nervous," he murmured into her hair. She leaned into him, smiling faintly. "No. Just..." He rested his chin on her shoulder. "You're doing better than I ever did. When I was younger, this place felt like a prison." "Does it still?" she asked. He hesitated. "Sometimes. But you make it feel different." They stayed like that for a while, the quiet settling between them like a warm blanket. Then she turned in his arms, looking up at him. "Do you ever think about how different this all could have been?" "All the time," he admitted. "One different decision, and we might never seen each other again. But we did." He smiled. "We did." The holidays arrived like a whirlwind. The palace transformed, massive fir trees decked in red and gold ornaments, wreaths adorning every arched doorway, and the scent of cinnamon and mulled wine drifting through the halls. Elena found herself laughing more, sleeping better, and actually enjoying the royal chaos. Mira fussed over Eloise constantly, dressing her in tiny velvet outfits and showing her off to visiting dignitaries like a prized gem. Even Alaric had begun carrying her during afternoon strolls, walking at a pace so careful it made Elena's heart swell. Her own parents flew in for Christmas. The royal jet had picked them up from New York, and when they stepped onto the palace steps, wide-eyed, stunned, and awkward, Elena was ready to forgive, or at least to begin. Dale gave a stiff nod to King Alaric, who returned it with the same, barely, their acknowledgement, and somehow that was enough to break the tension. They ended up in the palace garden, sipping brandy and talking about woodworking like old friends. Meanwhile, Christine sat with Mira, tears in her eyes as she watched her daughter hold court in a palace. That night, after Eloise had gone to sleep and the halls had quieted, Luca pulled Elena into their room and kissed her with a softness that still managed to take her breath away. "I used to think you were a dream," he whispered. "Still might be," she teased, brushing her fingers through his hair. He looked at her like she was the only thing that ever made sense. And for the first time, she felt like she belonged, not because of where she was, but because of who she was with. The morning after Christmas, soft golden light spilled across the grand bedroom, catching on the velvet curtains and gilded moldings. Elena stirred in the oversized bed, her body tangled in white sheets, the scent of cinnamon still lingering faintly from the night before. Eloise lay snuggled between her and Luca, her tiny hands curled into fists, one foot pressed lightly against Luca's ribs. He didn't seem to mind. He was already awake, gazing at both of them like they were the most fragile, sacred things he'd ever held. "You're staring," Elena whispered, voice husky with sleep. "I'm memorizing," he murmured. "You're the only thing worth remembering in this entire palace." She smiled, shifting closer until her forehead brushed his. Cheesy. Honest. Later that afternoon, while Eloise napped, Luca paced the nursery with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in hushed, clipped tones. Elena watched from the doorway, folding onesies into neat piles, noticing the stiffness in his shoulders. Something about his posture had changed since the holidays began. More tense, more cautious. When the call ended, he stayed silent for a moment before turning to her, his expression unreadable. "What is it?" she asked, drying her hands on her jeans. Luca crossed the room slowly, dragging a hand through his hair. "That was Greg. I had him double check something for me." Elena's brows furrowed.
Something about work?
He shook his head. "About you. About us." She stilled. "Luca, if this is about the marriage." "No, it's not that," he exhaled. "It's good news. I just don't know how to say it." She tilted her head. "Try." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small red box, the kind that looked like it should hold jewelry. But when he opened it, there was no necklace, no ring. Inside was a pregnancy test. Positive. Nestled next to it was a black and white ultrasound photo, the faint outline of a bean-sized shape nestled inside her womb. Elena's breath caught. "What? Is this?" "I found it," he said softly, "in the bathroom drawer. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for wipes and..." It was sitting there. She blinked rapidly, the room swaying slightly. He stepped closer. You're pregnant. She nodded, emotions flooding her. I found out right before Christmas. I wanted to wait until the right moment. His smile was slow, stunned, like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. We're having another baby. She let out a breathless laugh.
Apparently?
Lucas scooped her into his arms without warning, spinning her in a circle. She shrieked, laughing through tears as he kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. Okay, she said breathlessly. One baby was already chaos? Are you ready for two? He froze. What? What? She bit her lip, hesitating for dramatic effect. I had a second appointment. We're not having one. Luca stared at her. We're having twins. The room went quiet, then exploded with his laughter, deep and full and completely unrestrained. Twins? He echoed, running a hand down his face. Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. He turned toward the door. Mira's gonna cry. Alaric might actually dance. And he was right. Queen Isolde did cry, openly, tearfully, clutching Elena like a long-lost daughter. And King Alaric, well, he didn't dance, not technically, but Elena swore she saw him tap his foot as he lifted Eloise into his arms and whispered something that sounded suspiciously like a lullaby. Months passed in a blur of ultrasounds, baby name debates, and palace renovations to make space for two more cribs. Eloise toddled through the halls with a crown of flowers on her head, adored by everyone. And Luca was more involved than ever, reading parenting books, taking early morning shifts, holding her hand during every exam. One night, as Elena lay curled against him in bed, their daughters asleep in bassinets nearby, she whispered, "Do you ever think about that night? The first one?" "All the time," he replied, brushing her hair back. "I used to think it was a mistake," she admitted. He kissed her forehead. "It brought me to you." She smiled through the quiet. Their story hadn't started like a fairy tale, but somewhere along the way, it had become one built not on magic or perfection, but on love, the kind that shows up, stays, and grows stronger with every unexpected turn. And for Elena, that was more than enough. It was everything. Life lesson. This story reminds us that life doesn't always go according to plan. And sometimes, the most unexpected detours lead us exactly where we're meant to be. Elena's journey began in heartbreak, confusion, and uncertainty. But through each challenge, she discovered her strength, her voice, and her capacity to love without fear. She didn't wait for someone to save her. She didn't wait for someone to save her. Built a life worth living, brick by brick, choice by choice. And when love came back, not as a fairy tale, but as something real, grounded, and intentional, she chose it not out of desperation, but from a place of power. Luca's transformation teaches us that true love isn't just a feeling. It's a decision, a choice to show up, to stay, to take responsibility even when it's uncomfortable. He didn't fall in love with perfection. He fell in love with the woman who challenged him, who changed him, and who made him want to become more than his name or title. Together, they remind us that family isn't about bloodlines or crowns. It's about commitment, forgiveness, and choosing each other day after day. Real love is messy. It takes courage. It demands honesty and sacrifice. But when it's nurtured with truth and effort, it becomes something stronger than fate. It becomes home. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing from our amazing global community. And if this story touched your heart, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another unforgettable journey. More powerful stories are on the way.